Hi, I'm really excited to be back hosting another great family friendly workshop with MCASB. I'm really excited today because the tutorial is all about herb and flour shortbread cookies. I used to be a professional baker, so this subject is very near and dear to my heart. And in addition to that, I will also be touching upon taste and flavor and how that plays into it because it's a really important component that I feel like people don't always think about when cooking and especially baking. Um, so without further ado, I have a few slides that I am going to jump into, which Alex will pull up for me. So there are 5 different tastes that are present in the food that we eat. We have sweet, we have sour, salty, bitter, and umami. When you are eating, your brain is constantly searching for these 5 tastes in order to feel satisfied. So, for instance, if you have a dish in front of you that has all these different taste profiles present, then your brain will be satisfied faster. And in addition to that, you will also feel full faster. If you have a dish in front of you or a meal that doesn't have all these 5 tastes present, your brain will still be searching for the taste that it is not getting in that meal. That's why, for instance, when you have Thanksgiving, I personally love Thanksgiving, but it's a lot of rich, starchy food, like potatoes, stuffing, turkey. It's all kind of in the same family. And so that's why, for instance, you can eat a lot at Thanksgiving and not necessarily feel full right away. And it's because your body is searching for those other tastes, which I think is very, very interesting. So when you are cooking or baking, it is so important to try and make sure that you have all these 5 tastes accounted for in order to have the most well-balanced, satisfying dish that you are making. I think that this is really important for when we're using ingredients such as herbs and flowers, which are a little bit non-traditional to American baking. They're still very much heavily used, but they're not always the ingredients that we think about right away when we are doing our baking. When we are originally think of baking, we a lot of times it's like a really dense, really rich chocolate cake, which is so delicious, but it's a lot. Sometimes it's a lot to eat, and so adding these different elements can help make a more balanced dessert. So I'm going to give a couple examples of this on the next slide. So we have, like I said, the 5 different tastes. So sweet, some examples of sweet, we have, obviously sugar, honey, candy, really sweet fruits like peaches and strawberries. Also, depending on how you cook a food, can give it a different taste. So for instance, if you caramelize an onion, it's going to become really sweet. Whereas if you had a raw onion, it would be more bitter. Another example, mango, dates, watermelon, raisins, vanilla. Those are all just a handful of examples of sweet tastes that you find in different foods. Then we have salty. There's nothing really that replaces salt. It's just simply seasoning your food. However, if you do incorporate ingredients that have a lot of salt in them, that can take the place of maybe adding salt. So for instance, if you added something really salty like cheese or a cured meat to a food that you're making, that's going to bring a saltiness. So you wouldn't necessarily have to add more salt. Then we have sour, which is anything that's really acidic. So definitely like lemon, lime, other citrus flavors, vinegar, raw tomatoes, definitely the juice in tomatoes, that's very acidic. Pineapple, green apples, yogurt, those are all great examples of sour tastes that you find in food. Next, we have bitter. And so something like a very bitter herb is parsley. And then we also have charcoal. Like if you have a piece of charred meat or a burnt cookie, that burnt flavor has a really nice bitterness to it. Dark chocolate is really bitter. Coffee, arugula, dandelion greens, cranberries, grapefruit, caramel, and ginger. These are all great examples of foods that are bitter. And then lastly, we have umami. Umami, the best way to describe umami is like that really meaty flavor. And so obviously you find that naturally in meats and fish and meat broths. But you can also find it in ingredients such as nuts or mushrooms or soy sauce, seaweed. Also, you can find it, in cheese, tomatoes. And what's great is that a lot of foods can be placed in both of these categories. So for instance, the example that I have here is tomatoes. Tomatoes, the meat of the tomato has a very nice, rich umami flavor, but the juice in it is very acidic. So different, like I said, different ingredients can be very versatile, however you use to cook them and how you incorporate them into whatever you're making. So on the next slide, I will show you an example of a dessert that I've broken down all the 5 different tastes. So for a carrot cake, the sweet components of that carrot cake would be sugar, brown sugar, carrots, and raisins. Those are all the naturally sweet elements in that cake. Then for salty, you have salt, and you have the cream cheese, which is also a bit salty. So that's your salt. Then for sour, when I make carrot cake, I personally like putting a little bit of lemon juice and zest into the cream cheese frosting, and that helps brighten it up and balance the cake. Then bitter, we have the skins on the walnuts, especially when you toast walnuts, that skin gets really nice and bitter. And it's another great example of how one ingredient can have multiple tastes in them. Additionally to the walnut skins, ginger is also very bitter. And then lastly, to have our umami, we have walnuts. So next I will bring it to the last slide, which is the example of something that you can make with the recipe we will be learning about today, which is herb shortbread sandwich cookies. So for sweet, you have your sugar, you have your vanilla, and I have apricot jam, which I would sandwich in between the 2 shortbreads. That's very sweet. Then for salty, we have salt. Sour, we have lemon juice and zest. Then for the bitter element, we have rosemary, and umami, we have pistachios. So that's going to give that cookie, that sandwich cookie, a really nice, well-rounded taste profile and be very satisfying to eat. So I just kind of wanted to go over all that before we jump in, because so much of the tutorial today not only is to make these really beautiful cookies, but it is also to learn how to really take charge with your creativity when it comes to flavor pairings. And I think that a lot of time when we make desserts, obviously we love a dessert that is very cute and aesthetically pleasing, and that's half the fun in eating a dessert. But something else is that I would really encourage people to explore more with their flavor pairings and using the concept of these 5 different tastes present in order to enhance your baking or your cooking even more. So I hope that that is a good little background for all of you. And without further ado, I'm going to jump into the shortbread tutorial. So I personally already have all my ingredients scaled out. In my mixing bowl, I have my room temperature 10 tablespoons of butter. I also have 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, a 1/2 cup of powdered sugar, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then I have some vanilla that I'm going to add as well. So you'll definitely want to start with room temperature butter. This is going to be the easiest way to start, especially because you won't have any chunks of butter that will help your that will deter your baking process. Before I start adding any other ingredients, I like to simply break down the butter to make sure that it's really nice and malleable. Like I said, you don't want any big, huge chunks necessarily. And so we're just gonna kind of mix it up, make it very loose. And so once that's broken down, you wanna scrape the sides, get it all down there. And then we're going to add our 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. Also, I would like to say that people can either follow along with this or do this later. I will not be showing you the actual baking process because we just don't want to sit around to watch something bake, but I will show you the finished product. And so if you are following along, just know that it might be best to fully bake your creations once this tutorial is over. So I'm mixing the powdered sugar in. I don't want to go too fast because I don't want the powdered sugar to go everywhere, but I'm simply mixing it in with the butter until it becomes nice and creamed together. Get it all nice and incorporated. All right, so once it is all fully mixed together and it looks like this, then we are simply going to add a little bit of flavoring. So I'm going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Add that in. And so for starters, we have sugar and vanilla. So that is our sweet component. Next, I am going to add the juice of a lemon. I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it because I've made this before, but if anyone's watching at home, I would probably do about 2 teaspoons or so of lemon juice, but also you can do it to taste. So if you want to be a little bit more acidic, feel free to do that as well. So a little bit of lemon juice. And then I'm simply going to mix that all together. Because there is so much fat from the butter, it's going to take a second for the liquid, for the vanilla and the lemon juice to fully kind of incorporate with the butter and sugar. But don't worry, it'll all come together. If it looks a little bit weird, don't fret. So once that is pretty well mixed together, I am then going to add my ½ tablespoon of salt, which I already have measured out here. And that is our salty component. All mixed together. And you can do this by either using a spatula, as you see me doing right here, a rubber spatula, or a electric mixer. If you use an electric mixer though, I highly recommend using a paddle attachment instead of a whisk attachment. So once that is all together, we are lastly going to add our flour. You can just pour it all in. And so when this comes together, it's going to seem very, very crumbly. That is totally fine. It's going to take a second to really get it all incorporated together. And like I said, it's going to seem very dry, very crumbly at first, but it'll do its thing. So as I've noticed in making this recipe a few times, and I might not have mentioned it in the directions, but I add about probably like a tablespoon of water to it. It'll just kind of help it along because it is very crumbly. You can still roll it out with it being this crumbly, but I like the dough to be a little bit easier to work with. And so if your dough like this is ever, never shy away from adding a little bit of water. Always kind of trust your gut on that unless something specifically says otherwise. So add a little bit of water. That's just going to help it come together a little bit easier. And what's nice about this dough is that since it is simply sugar and flour and butter and salt and then flavoring, it does not have any gluten development really. And so you just kind of have to expect it to be a little bit crumblier. Just add a tiny bit more water. Okay. All right, that's coming together real nice. All right, so once it's kind of looking like this, like I said, it is going to be crumbly, but once it's all a well-mixed dough, then we can start to roll it out. So I'm just gonna set this to the side for a moment. And so you're gonna wanna take a clean surface. I have this cutting board that I'm gonna be using for this tutorial. And you're gonna wanna lightly dust it with some flour. Just some regular AP flour will work fine. Then we are going to take some of the dough that we've made, and simply press it onto your surface. It's always best to help your dough along as well as you can before you actually start rolling it. It'll just make everything a little bit easier. So what I do is sometimes I kind of shape it into a square a little bit. That helps move it along, and also press it down before I start rolling. So once I have it ready to roll, I'm going to just sprinkle a little bit more all-purpose flour on top so it doesn't really stick to my rolling pin. And then I am going to roll out the dough to about a 1/4 inch thickness. If you're going to make sandwich cookies out of this by adding more different ingredients to add different tastes, I would recommend going a little bit thinner, but that's also up to you. You want to make sure it doesn't, if it starts sticking to your rolling pin, just add a little bit more flour to kind of help it along. This dough is a little bit sticky and crumbly, so just keep that in mind. All right. This is almost the thickness that I want it. So once I am done rolling it out, it's a nice thin layer like this. I'm not rolling it all out right now. I'll roll out the rest a little bit later. But to start, this is a great starting point. So once that is all good to go, I'm just gonna roll it out a little bit more. You're then going to want to take a cookie cutter. I would use sizes along about these sizes. You can also use whatever shape you'd like for these. I'm going to use the smaller one, but simply you just then cut out your cookies. And sometimes I like using a metal spatula to help kind of get it off, and then place it onto a lined sheet tray with some parchment paper. So we're just going to cut out these cookies. And what's really nice is that since these cookies do not have any rising agent in them, they are not really going to expand that much other than puff up a little bit. So you can actually place many of them close together on your sheet tray. What else is really nice about this recipe is that you can roll out the dough as many times as you'd like. So you can use every last scrap of dough that you have. You can simply, when you have these scraps after cutting a few cookies out, you can then roll it back up, roll it out again, and you will be able to have no waste, which I personally really love. So I'm just going to cut out a few more of these. And this one's kind of sticky. Right. Okay. I'm just gonna do a couple more to fill my sheet tray. All right. So now I am going, later on I will use more of these scraps, but for right now, I'm just gonna set all this to the side. And now we have our nice cut out shortbread cookies, which we will now begin to decorate. So what I would highly recommend is that for you to take some water and a pastry brush. If you don't have a pastry brush, you can simply just dip your fingers in the water and kind of dab it on top of your cookie. But you'll want to brush your cookies with water. This will help all your herbs and your flours to stick a little bit better. Because one thing that we do not want to have happening is for them to curl up while we're baking. Luckily though, they do have enough moisture in them where they're not gonna necessarily shrivel up by any means if you're using fresh herbs, but we just don't want them to curl up on themselves. You can also use dried herbs and flowers for this. Just please keep in mind that dried herbs and flowers will have a stronger flavor. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You just want to be kind of careful of that to not be too overpowering. So once I have brushed water on these cookies, now comes the fun part. So first I'm going to start out with some fresh flowers that I have. I have some pansies, and then I also have, I totally forgot about this until this morning, but I had a sweet potato that I was growing. If you have a sprouted sweet potato, just put it in some water. In a couple weeks, it'll sprout a really nice huge stem and have these really great edible leaves, and they're kind of buttery. They're a little bit of acidic, but not really. And they have a really pretty shape to them. They're kind of like a heart shape. So I'm going to use some of those. Put one of those on there. Have this really lovely, yellow pansy that I'm also going to use. You want to make sure though with the pansies that you want to, which I've already done, is you want to remove like the green stem and everything, but you want to still keep a little bit of it intact so the flower doesn't necessarily fall apart. So you kind of want to be careful about that. I also have a really nice purple pansy, which I will be using. I have another one of these leaves. And like I said, you want to really press down on these to get them nice and flat. And so if any of your herbs are a little bit temperamental, you can always take a little sheet of parchment and put it on top of your cookie and use that to press down so it doesn't come up on itself, but you want to make sure that it's really, really nice and pressed down in there. And then for the flowers, since they are a little bit more delicate, I would simply press where the petals are. If you press each petal down individually, instead of just trying to smush it down, it'll actually hold a little bit better. So I'm just going to press down these petals, and eventually the flower will flatten on its own as well. So as you can see, they look really nice and cute. Now we're going to move on to using some herbs. So I personally love using rosemary. If you're using rosemary, please pluck off the little bundles of herbs that are on the side and do not use the large stem of the rosemary. That's not going to taste that good, and it's also going to be really hard for people to chew. So then you can simply pluck some off. You can arrange them in really kind of fun shapes. I like using rosemary because that kind of gives it like a little, as if it's like a little bush. Again, on another cookie, I'll put some more rosemary. And what's really great about the herbs that I'm using is that they're all pretty complementary. So you can put them together. You can make all sorts of designs with them. For instance, I also here have some dried lavender. So on one of my cookies that has rosemary, I'm also going to sprinkle some dried lavender around the edges, which is also gonna pair really nicely together and just give it a really great flavor. Then I also have some fresh sage, and fresh sage is great because it has these little tiny leaves and it looks really adorable. And so you can, make all sorts of designs out of the sage. Also, it's truly, truly really delicious. So pressing these sage leaves into the cookies as well. We do a big sage leaf and then some lavender. I also have some dried hibiscus flowers, which are also really nice, and they have a little bit of a fruity taste to them. So I'm going to sprinkle those on one of the cookies. I'm going to do one that is half hibiscus, half lavender, have a really nice floral cookie. I'm going to do one that's just lavender because everyone loves lavender. And it's really fun. You can just play around however you'd like to make any sort of cool design, any cool flavor pairings that you're kind of maybe interested in, but just make sure that they are pressed down nice and firm. Do a little bit more rosemary. Some rosemary and some hibiscus now. And I'll do one more that's just lavender. The lavender ones especially, I would highly recommend using your piece of parchment to push it down, or else it will become a little bit more temperamental and might fall off. As you can see, I now have these really beautiful cookies that have fresh herbs. I'm not using any dry herbs, but you can certainly use them. Some fresh flowers, some dried flowers. They're perfect for springtime. I mean, Easter is tomorrow. And how I like to finish these off is I like to sprinkle a little bit of granulated sugar on top. And something that I've been doing for years, which I personally love, is making lemon sugar, which is super easy. You just take some regular granulated sugar and some lemon zest, and you simply then just massage the lemon zest into the sugar, and it makes this great kind of sour, tart sugar that's great for topping a lot of different desserts. I personally also like when I make blueberry muffins, I top them with lemon sugar. And so I'm just going to sprinkle some lemon sugar on top of these. I'm going to give it a really, not only a nice texture, but it'll look really cute and sparkly. And also give it a little bit more sweetness and acidity. So you can just sprinkle them on all of them, or maybe some of them, whatever you'd like to do. But I personally love topping them with sugar. You can even top them on the flowers. So once that is done and your cookies are all cut out and decorated and have your sugar and everything, you're going to want to let those rest in your freezer for about 15 minutes. Helping the dough rest just makes sure that it doesn't really change shape while it's baking. Also, it just aids the process, and also it helps the herbs when they bake and stuff, so they don't really curl up as much. So since I'm not just going to sit around and show you them freezing and baking, I would normally put them in the oven at 350 for about 15 minutes. I would rotate your sheet tray about halfway through. So set a timer for about 7 or 8 minutes, flip it, then cook it for another 7 minutes. And then they will be a really nice, nice kind of golden brown. They'll be really nice and golden brown on the bottom. The tops will still look a little bit pale, but that's kind of what you want to go for. If you'd like to bake them a little bit darker, by all means, bake them to taste. But that's just personally what I like to do. As long as you get the nice golden brown on the bottom, that's what we are looking for. So after you bake them, your finished product will be super cute and look like, I have some examples right here. So this one's kind of hard to tell, but it's a really cute pansy. It's a white pansy. I also have some rosemary, lavender, some hibiscus, and then of course this beautiful purple pansy that I have. And so with this cookie, we have on its own, it has most of the 5 flavors present. But if you want to kick it up a notch and add to it, you can obviously make a sandwich cookie or add a glaze to them, and really be creative to try to incorporate these different tastes. So for instance, like I had early on in the example, the rosemary sandwich cookie. So I have one of my cookies that I have rosemary on. I also have a plain cookie that I had baked off for this purpose. And simply what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some apricot preserves that I have, and I'm simply going to spread them on the bottom cookie. And this is going to add a little bit of sweetness to it. And then in addition to that, I'm going to sprinkle some crushed pistachios on top to give it that nice umami flavor. Also, I'm just going to add a little touch of sea salt, just a tiny, tiny bit to give it a little extra saltiness. And then when they are sandwiched together, you have a cookie that has the sweet from the sugar and the vanilla. You have the sour from the lemon. You have the salt from the salt. You have the bitter from the rosemary, and you have the umami from the pistachio. You have a very nice, well-rounded cookie and a great dessert for all. It's a great springtime dessert. I would, and like I said, please play around with these different flavors and the tastes that come along with them. For instance, if I didn't want to necessarily make a sandwich cookie, I could make a orange lavender cookie, which pair great together, and then drizzle some dark chocolate over it for some bitterness, and then sprinkle some sea salt on top of that. There's all these endless options, and I think it's really cool to start playing around with flavors. If you're looking for great resources, if you want to get more into flavor pairings, one of my favorite books is called The Flavor Bible. It's a great resource. It's kind of like an encyclopedia. You just look up whatever ingredient you want to use, and it tells you all the foods that pair well with it. Also, a simple Google search will do. But I think that it's a really great way not only to expand the creativity in baking by making these really cute, aesthetically pleasing desserts, but to also really think about pairing flavors. And that's why I picked shortbread cookies for this workshop, is because shortbreads are a very basic, very classic cookie. And with that, you can take it in sort of any direction that you want. You can even, before I baked it, if I wanted to sprinkle some almonds or pistachios on top of them, that would give a great umami flavor. There's all sorts of things that we can do, and expanding our flavor profile for baking can open up to so many great creative artistic creations when it comes to baking. And so I'm so excited that I got to share this with all of you. And like I said, this is a great recipe for spring, and I hope that you all have fun making it and fun exploring. And if there's any, if there's any ingredients that you're even not sure if they go together, just try it. You might be so surprised. Like, for instance, people love, if you're thinking of apple pie, so many people think of apple and cinnamon. They go hand in hand. They're a classic flavor combo. I'm not knocking that, but personally, I make apple thyme pies. Apple and thyme are another classic combo, but people don't obviously think of it as much. And it really gives a nice, refreshing flavor that people aren't always used to. And everyone is so pleasantly surprised how well it goes together. And it's just expanding your creativity in your flavors, and having, thinking about it in that way, not only just making an artistic creation from your baking.